Memphis. Memphis was wild, man. In the heyday of the territories, few areas had the kind of success and notoriety like that of Memphis. Whether it was called the CWA, the USWA, or Pro Wrestling USA, the territory has a rich tapestry of legendary moments and stars. On the other side of the coin, though, Memphis was also home to some of the strangest gimmicks in wrestling history. From volcano lords to Christmas creatures to colossi, Jerry Lawler's love of comic books and movie monsters, combined with his marketing skills and his knack for showmanship, left a huge mark on the territory and the biz at large, for better and for worse. Learn more about these wacky characters in my Patreon exclusive series, It Came from Memphis. There are lots of interesting stories there about some of the wild and woolly ghosts of wrestling past, but there's one part of Memphis history that's too big, crazy, and downright historic for me to condense into a 3 or 4 minute video, and that's the birth of Mr. McMahon.
That I can quote Jim Neighbors, and many of you can perhaps understand what I'm saying a little bit more. Surprise, surprise, surprise!
You heard me. It turns out the character that helped revolutionize the industry alongside Stone Cold Steve Austin wasn't born in Montreal, but in fact many years earlier in Memphis. Talk about developmental. This primordial version of the character would appear on local Memphis TV on a regular basis for the better part of 1993, antagonizing Jerry Lawler and sending a cavalcade of WWF stars to the smaller territory, a land where everything we thought we knew about babyfaces and heels was turned upside down. It is a fascinating footnote in wrestling history, when the industry was swirling down the toilet and the World Wrestling Federation itself was bracing for a whole lot of upheaval as rumors of a federal indictment began to heat up. And this week I'm giving the infamous McMemphis angle a closer look. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning of this working relationship between Jerry Lawler's USWA and the World Wrestling Federation. In the summer of 1992, lower card wrestlers like Sergeant Slaughter, Jim Duggan, Coco Beware, Papa Shango, and the Bushwhackers began invading Memphis to fight Lawler. They'd show up, challenge Lawler for the belt, trade wins, then leave. Very much a territory setup. Then by the end of the year, Lawler debuted for the Federation as an announcer on Superstars. Much like when Paul Heyman bailed on ECW to replace Lawler on color commentary in 2001, this was kind of like hell freezing over. Lawler had spent years taking shots at the WWF on Memphis TV, and even sued the company in the 80s when they brought Harley Race to Memphis for a house show, advertising him somewhat deceptively as the King. But while Jerry was fulfilling his on-air duties for the Federation, he was still committed to booking and wrestling in his company down south. Lawler worked to further bridge the gap between the two worlds by pitching an idea to Vince that would allow him to play a manager of sorts, sending wrestlers to the territory at his bidding. It was a great chance for McMahon to finally flex his heel muscles. It's something he'd always wanted to do ever since a young Vinnie Lupton was first introduced to his biological father and got a crash course in wrestling from his idol, Dr. Jerry Graham. The younger McMahon became enthralled with the idea of being a heel wrestler, something Vince Sr. vehemently forbade. In the summer of 1993, the WWF held its very first King of the Ring pay-per-view. Bret Hart would win the namesake tournament, becoming the first and only man to do it twice. During the celebration, the dastardly Lawler beat down the Hitman over the title of King, setting off what would become a 2-year feud between them on TV. But fans who just watched the World Wrestling Federation were only getting half the story. What was playing out on national TV was very different from what Memphis fans were seeing. And like in 1997, it all began with a screw job involving Bret Hart. At the same time the devious Lawler was playing the heel against white meat babyface Bret in the WWF, the roles were totally reversed in Memphis. Lawler was the eternal conquering hero of the territory, while Bret and his brother Owen were a pair of nasty baddies invading the company. Calling Memphis by the nickname of Disgraceland, the Harts battled Lawler and a young Jeff Jarrett, winning only after crooked referee Paul Neighbors cost the good guys in the end. Where's his "Damn Right I Did" t-shirt? A stretcher match was signed for the Mid-South Coliseum between Lawler and Neighbors. Lawler promised fans a full refund if he couldn't get the win. Then in a promo in which he was out of frame for most of the time, Neighbors went ahead and spoiled the big surprise for the match.
One of my best friends is going to be in my corner, and that is Vince McMahon.
You've spoiled the announcement here. You're going to have Vince McMahon in your corner?
Sure enough, Vince McMahon himself was officially inserted into the storyline. To help build up the match, the WWF even filmed an episode of The King's Court between Lawler and Vince during a TV taping that aired exclusively in Memphis.
You'll be exposed for the kind of king you truly are. A Burger King. This Burger King is going to give you a whopper. I assure you it will not be a happy meal.
I'm sure that was considered stellar writing in 1993. Well, who am I kidding? They considered it that in 2013.
Is the big shot himself of the World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon. Now, he's the big cheese, right?
It was all kind of surreal for the time. By 1993, Vince's role as owner had never been publicly acknowledged. He was just a loud announcer in the powder blue suit. He and Jerry would razz each other on commentary, but it never got meta, and their heat in Memphis was never referenced on Federation TV. For all the fans outside that market knew, that was the sum of their relationship. But things really came to a head during the stretcher match. Vince seated at ringside, accompanied by a pre-stooge Pat Patterson. The heel turn began subtly enough when Vince tripped Lawler outside the ring. But then the unthinkable happened when Vinnie Mac sucker punched the King in front of his loyal subjects.
Oh, he nails the King with a right hand!
How wild must that moment have been for the fans in attendance? It'd be like if Michael Cole today went to a GCW show and popped Nick Gage in the mouth. Ooh. Just got a weird chill thinking about it. Lawler would shake off the interference and handily defeat Neighbors. Another example of why you should never bother keeping your ticket stub if a wrestler promises a refund should they lose. But Vince attacking Lawler was just the beginning. As McMahon sent wrestler after wrestler to challenge the King, he would often cut smug, scathing promos that were meant solely for the Memphis audience.
How could you have been so rude? That's Southern hospitality. How could you have been so rude? The king of the unified title. Whoopee. You've got the worst case of halitosis, but you know what? Come to think of it, it smelled just like the Mid-South Coliseum. Jerry Lawler, you know what you're the king of. You're the king of nothing.
Death, taxes, and Randy Savage.
If you're like me and only began watching wrestling after the Mr. McMahon character became a thing, this is insane to watch. What we're witnessing here is a trial run of the heel persona that would help Vince McMahon pull his company out from the depths, waging war on his announcing colleague in the only part of the country where said colleague is an unimpeachable babyface. Holy crap, this angle even predates the USA versus Canada angle from '97. Forget the land up north, Memphis is truly bizarro world. I'm not just talking about the gimmicks either. One day before their match at SummerSlam in Michigan, Lawler and Hart faced off once again at the Mid-South Coliseum, this time in a steel cage match. Vince convinced Lawler to put his money where his mouth was and once again offer fans a refund if he lost.
Come on, Big Mouth. Why don't you say, if I lose the match to the Hitman Bret Hart, I'll give you your money back.
The crowd at the Coliseum got the best of both worlds as Bret used a chain to beat Lawler until it was exposed by Jeff Jarrett, ending with a reverse decision. But it was the WWF who had the last laugh that night as Giant Gonzalez would enter the ring and help Bret batter the King. What, no chloroform on hand? After El Gigante came and went through the territory, Vince sent in the undefeated Tatanka to take on Lawler. And in true Memphis fashion, this match was billed as the end of the trail. Oh yeah? Which trail, guys? The end of which trail you're referencing there?
The smoke signals that Tatanka will leave after the fire is out. The king has been dethroned. The king has been scalped.
These references aren't quite on the nose enough for me. Jerry, can you help me out?
He better bring some fire. He better be a fiery Indian. He better drink a little fire water, as a matter of fact. I got something for Tatanka.
There it is. Much like Vince's flirtation with heeldom here, Tatanka's brief stay in Memphis also served as a rehearsal for his own heel turn that would come 1 year later in the Federation. Though after listening to his promos, you can understand why Ted DiBiase did most of the talking.
You're so stupid and so ignorant. No wonder you think Jerry King, Jerry the Lawler, is the real king here in Memphis.
And do you want to see something really jarring? Here's a Tatanka promo that aired on Superstars on the same day as that episode of the USWA.
All those great fans out there, all those little kids that support me and believe in me. You not only disgrace me, you disgrace them.
Tatanka beat Lawler for the unified world title, which, let's be honest, isn't that impressive. I mean, the belt changed hands 8 times that year alone. But it did give us this sweet promo of Vince trolling Lawler with the belt.
Don't you think this belt looks much better around my slivet waist than it does around the rather rotund midsection of Jerry Lawler?
Well, it's going to be a long time before I get over Vince's pronunciation of the word svelte.
Jerry Lawler, it's your last stand.
Never mind, that did it. Somehow turning heel also made Tatanka an idiot as he fell for Lawler's proposition for the champs team to put all their titles on the line against Lawler and his team at an upcoming Survivor Series style match on September 20th. It turns out Ludwig Borga was not the first man to break Tatanka's unbeaten streak, but rather Jerry Lawler 1 month earlier. Useless fact: if a wrestler does the job but it's not on national TV, does he really lose? While all this was going on, Randy Savage was languishing in the World Wrestling Federation. For most of 1993, the Macho Man was forced into a commentary position, relegated to only wrestling a handful of times throughout the year. See, at the ripe old age of 41, Vince McMahon didn't like the idea of Savage wrestling full-time with the rest of his roster. But when it came to working the smaller crowds in Memphis, no problem, buddy, have at it.
I am coming to the Mid-South Coliseum, Macho Maniac. Be ready, yeah!
Savage's arrival to the territory was announced with a big video package to the tune of Pomp and Circumstance. Finally, a song Jerry didn't have to feel bad about not getting the rights to. I love how this highlight reel not only showed off his great wrestling ability, but also put over all the TV shows he'd been on lately. I mean, how else are you gonna know the guy's a star?
You have no chance in hell of beating the Macho Man Randy Savage. And if I'm lying, I'm dying.
Of all the baddies McMahon sent to Graceland, this one actually had some bona fide history behind it. And for more on that, I turn to my colleague, historian and noted wrestling genius, Chris Hero. Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. The history between Jerry the King Lawler and Macho Man Randy Savage is personal and occasionally bitter. This goes all the way back to the late 70s. In 1978, Angelo Poffo started ICW International Championship Wrestling, and it was mostly to give his sons Randy and Lanny the spotlight that he felt they deserved. We wrestling historians refer to this as the world class effect. ICW was considered an outlaw promotion as it wasn't a member of the National Wrestling Alliance and would run in direct competition with other territories. They got into a lot of legal trouble with said territories, most of all Memphis. Not only did the Poffos compete with Jerry Jarrett's Continental Wrestling Association, they rated talent from there as well. Finally, in 1984, ICW shut down due to dwindling fan support, and its assets were purchased by Jarrett and Lawler. The Macho Man came to CWA for an off and on program with the King. It ended in 1985 with the Loser Leaves Town match that Randy Savage lost, before moving on to the World Wrestling Federation and superstardom. And in what was likely one final dig on the King, Macho's first promo back saw him having a difficult time remembering the name of the company he was working for.
That I walk out of there with the UWF title, yeah, United Wrestling Championship, World Championship.
And that concludes our lesson for the day. For more brilliant and fascinating wrestling insights such as this, head on over to adfreeshows.com and check out my new podcast, Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling? And to set the record straight, Lanny Poffo may be the genius, but there's only one wrestling genius, Chris Hero. Back to you, Brian.
The match, titled Fire on the Mountain, lived up to its name, as Lawler hit Savage with one of his famous fireball attacks while the referee was down. Somehow that was not the finish, though, as Randy merely shrugged it off and attacked Jerry with the chain, initially scoring the pinfall before the decision was reversed, and ending nearly identical to the match with Bret Hart some months earlier. I still can't believe how easily Macho Man no-sold the fireball after seeing how Randy Orton reacted to one last month. Undertaker was right. Today's wrestlers have gone soft. A rematch was set for October 11th, and Savage announced that Vince McMahon would once again be at ringside. In his promo, he unwittingly predicted how the whole feud would abruptly end.
And now you're gonna get found out, yeah. Litigation? You don't like litigation now, do you, boy?
Hold that thought for a couple of weeks until cross-examination, Mr. Savage. But Jerry was undeterred by the news, revealing a plan of his own.
I've gone out and I've got somebody that I know that if you make one false move, this guy would love to get his hands around your scrawny neck and squeeze it until your eyeballs pop out.
Nails? Oh, never mind. It's Harvey Whippleman, aka Downtown Bruno, who's also working double duty at the time, serving as the manager to Adam Bomb in the WWF and as a punchline to a Lawler promo in Memphis.
You'll be seeing the Macho Man the same way that I do. In living Macho vision.
Savage would beat Lawler for the unified title after more Vince McMahon chicanery in front of a whopping 850 fans at Mid-South. It all seemed to build toward an in-ring blow-off between Lawler and McMahon. If not an actual match, then surely seeing Vince get the pile driver and carted off in an ambulance, Andy Kaufman style, felt like an inevitability. However, Vince's debut as a heel wrestler would have to wait for about 5.5 years or so, as a little bit of
litigation
reared its ugly head when Jerry Lawler was indicted on charges of rape and sodomy in connection with a teenage girl. The timing couldn't have been worse for the World Wrestling Federation. Lawler's indictment took place a week before the Survivor Series pay-per-view, where Jerry and his group of masked knights was going to take on Bret Hart and his brothers. Lawler was out, the company's relationship with the USWA was cut, and Shawn Michaels was hastily unsuspended to be the King's replacement, making the whole night gimmick utterly confusing. You'd think they'd give a legend like Jerry Lawler the benefit of the doubt and allow a thorough investigation to be conducted instead of just assuming the worst and cutting ties. It was good enough for Velveteen Dream. The charges were eventually dropped when the alleged victim's story fell apart in court, and soon Jerry was welcomed back with open arms, in the form of a not at all menacing promo.
Understand that all of your problems, all of your legal problems are over, and you're just strutting around Memphis. Your problems, as far as I'm concerned, your problems are just beginning.
Lawler's initial ousting, combined with Vince's own indictment on steroid distribution charges one day before Survivor Series, spelled the sudden end of the storyline. And with the exception of a couple of promos in 1997, that was it for heel Vince being exclusive to Memphis TV. And although it was something that was mostly known to Memphians until the internet came along, it actually provided the building blocks for what would eventually save the business from the doldrums of the mid-1990s. There was the dynamic of the Memphis and WWF wrestlers trading places along the heel and face spectrum depending on where they worked. There was the invasion aspect we'd see with the NWO. And of course there's Vince himself, who morphed from straight-laced announcer and world-class shill into the warped Machiavellian all-time classic heel that served as the ultimate foil to Steve Austin and still appears on programming to this very day. Vince was perfect in his role on USWA television. His promos were eloquent yet totally condescending. He wasn't quite evil incarnate like he would become in the late 90s, but he was still a natural. And as a member of the stuffy coastal elite in a persona that fans never would have expected to see at the time, he was the perfect person to rile up the Memphis audience. It was also pretty wild to see guys like Bret Hart, Tatanka, Randy Savage, and more knowing what they're up to in the WWF and seeing just how different they were in Memphis. They're heels in one area and babyfaces everywhere else. It was totally surreal. Simply put, there is no way an angle as unique as this could go on today kept secret from everywhere else. The history of Memphis wrestling has had its ups and downs, its share of legends and its share of laughable duds. But no matter how many cheesy gimmicks have come and gone, the territory will always be able to hang their hat on two things: the first major in-ring involvement of a celebrity from outside the business, and the first glimpse of a character that would change the course of wrestling forever. If you want to see more of Vince's early heel promos in all their blurry glory, you can find them on YouTube by looking up McMemphis. If you have some time to spare, I definitely recommend checking the videos out, as they provide a cool glimpse into a little known and vastly underrated piece of wrestling history. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time. Check out the Patreon!